The first thing Caleb Rourke noticed was not the man's face. It was the champagne. Everyone else on the terrace of the Halcyon Hotel held their glasses carelessly, letting the pale wine tip and shimmer as they talked. The man near the bronze statue held his perfectly level, though he had not taken a drink in nearly 10 minutes. Each time the woman in the white evening coat moved, his glass moved with her. Not toward his mouth, but just enough to give his hand a reason to rise while his eyes stayed fixed on her. Caleb stood beneath the striped awning with a black SUV key in one hand and a parking ticket in the other, listening to a donor complain that the seat heater in his Mercedes had been turned down. Rain ticked against the hotel's copper gutters. A cold March wind came off the Arkansas River and swept between the columns, lifting gown hems and making the gas flames in the entrance lanterns bend sideways. The donor kept talking. Caleb nodded at the proper moments. But the familiar cold had already started climbing the back of his neck. It was not fear exactly. Fear came with a name and an object. This was older than fear, a silent alarm wired into a part of him he could not reach. Across the terrace, Lenora Voss, founder of Voss Meridian Industries and the richest person in Tulsa County, stood beneath a heat lamp speaking with the mayor's wife. Her white coat was draped over her shoulders rather than worn, and a diamond clasp at her throat caught the light whenever she turned. 400 guests had come to raise money for the new children's wing at St. Arden Medical Center. Half of them wanted a photograph with her. The other half wanted 5 private minutes. The man with the untouched champagne wanted neither. He kept his distance. He kept his body angled toward the woman, and every time she shifted, he corrected his position before the people around her did. Caleb handed the Mercedes owner his receipt. "Have a good evening, sir." "Have a good—" The man did not look at him. Caleb barely noticed. He was watching the level glass. On most nights, Caleb's mind stayed occupied by small, practical things. The transmission slipping in his 12-year-old pickup. The electric bill folded beneath a magnet on his refrigerator. Whether his 8-year-old son, Owen, had remembered to take the inhaler from his backpack before spending the night with Caleb's sister. Small things were safe. Small things could be measured and paid and repaired. Caleb understood worn brake pads, loose belts, and overdue bills. He understood the tired rhythm of raising a boy alone. Permission slips on the counter, cereal ground into the kitchen floor, one clean school shirt left on a Thursday morning. He had built a life from whatever remained after disaster, and while no one would have admired it from the outside, it was solid enough to stand on. He worked days at Danner's Fleet Repair and 3 nights a week directing cars at the Halcyon. The hotel job paid for Owen's asthma medication, school lunches, and the occasional movie on Sunday afternoons when Caleb was awake enough to keep his eyes open. That evening, before the gala began, Owen had called to remind him about the class trip to the Oklahoma City Science Museum. "It's not till next month," the boy had said, trying to sound casual in the way children do when they know money is involved. "Mrs. Keaton says the payment can be late." Caleb had looked at the dented metal locker where he kept his work boots and told his son it would not be late. He had no idea how he would make that true, but fathers sometimes had to promise from the future and trust themselves to catch up. 40 minutes later, the hotel's assistant manager had pulled Caleb aside because a guest had complained about grease beneath his thumbnail. "This isn't the garage," Bryce Talley had said, lowering his voice as though preserving Caleb's dignity while removing it. "These guests notice details." Caleb had looked at Bryce's spotless cuffs and said, "Understood." He had washed his hands again, though the dark line had lived in his skin for years and was not going anywhere. Now, standing beneath the awning, he thought about Bryce's warning. These guests noticed details. The truth was that guests noticed whatever confirmed the world they already believed in. They noticed diamonds. They noticed labels, wine vintages, and the names printed on place cards. They did not notice a tired parking attendant, and none of them had noticed the man whose champagne never moved. Caleb watched without turning his head. The man wore a dark camel overcoat cut too generously through the shoulders, as though it had been chosen to hide shape rather than flatter it. His shoes were rubber-soled and nearly new, but rain had darkened only the toes. He had not walked across the open courtyard like the other guests. He had come through the covered side arcade. His hair was damp near the temples but dry on top, which meant he had worn something over his head and removed it before stepping beneath the lights. He carried no phone. At a gala where guests photographed desserts before eating them, that absence felt louder than a shout. A silver pin on his lapel suggested he belonged to the hospital foundation. Yet Caleb had helped unload boxes for the event that afternoon and knew the volunteer pins were blue enamel, not silver. The man's pin was a cheap imitation of something expensive, meant to be recognized without being examined. Caleb looked toward Lenora Voss's protection detail. He saw two men he had seen earlier, one broad-shouldered agent near the hotel doors and another farther down the terrace speaking into his sleeve. They were competent. Caleb could tell from the way they divided the space how rarely they looked at the same point at once. But they were watching for disruption, raised voices, sudden movement, a guest pushing too close. The man with the champagne was doing nothing. Doing nothing was his disguise. Caleb knew that disguise because another man had worn it 11 years earlier beneath the fluorescent lights of a grocery store parking lot. That man had leaned against a cart return and looked harmless while Caleb's wife, Erin, loaded bags into the trunk. Caleb had seen him. He had noticed the heavy jacket on a warm evening, the way the man pretended to study a receipt while watching Erin. Caleb had taken 3 steps toward her, then stopped when the man smiled and raised one hand as though greeting someone behind her. For half a second, Caleb had believed the ordinary explanation, because the ordinary explanation was easier to live with. Maybe they knew each other. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe Caleb was tired after a 12-hour shift and seeing danger where none existed. In that half second, the man crossed the lane. By the time Caleb understood, Erin was already screaming. She survived 9 hours. Caleb had survived 11 years, which was not the same thing. The black SUV owner snapped his fingers near Caleb's shoulder. "My keys?" Caleb looked down and realized he was still holding them. "Sorry, sir." He gave them over, and the man walked away without another word. On the terrace, Lenora Voss finished with the mayor's wife and moved toward a group of surgeons near the fountain. The camel coat drifted right. Not immediately. A patient hunter never moved at the same instant as the target. He waited for 2 couples to cross between them, then stepped behind a marble column and emerged 6 yards closer. His champagne remained level. Caleb's mouth went dry. The sensible part of him began presenting its case. He was a parking attendant. He had no badge, no authority, and no proof. Lenora Voss had professional protection. Caleb had a red rain jacket with the halcyon crest stitched over his heart and a cheap radio that barely worked inside the garage. If he confronted a donor and caused a scene, Bryce would fire him before the police finished taking statements. Danner's fleet repair could not give him more hours. His truck needed front tires before the next rain. Owen's field trip money was due Friday. Every responsible choice pointed toward the curb and the line of waiting cars. Responsibility had been Caleb's religion since Erin died. Responsibility meant not gambling with the rent because of a feeling. It meant accepting that one mistake in the past did not turn him into a prophet. Yet the cold kept climbing. The man's right arm hung close to his side beneath the overcoat, while the left held the glass. When a server brushed past him, he pivoted from the hips without letting the server touch his right side. Caleb had seen that protective turn before in men carrying tools they did not want discovered. A knife, a weapon, a bottle. It did not matter which. The movement mattered. Caleb glanced at Marco Sandoval, the younger valet beside him, who was trying to locate a guest's Lexus in the underground garage. "Cover the front for 2 minutes," Caleb said. Marco looked up. "Tally said nobody leaves the lane. Tell him I'm checking a damaged vehicle." "What damaged vehicle?" Caleb set his radio on the counter. "The one I'm about to find." He did not hurry. Running would draw attention, and attention would make the camel coat recalculate. Caleb crossed the driveway with a folded wool wrap draped over his arm, something a guest had left in the back seat of a Lincoln. To the crowd, he was an employee returning an expensive item, nothing more. The terrace rose in 3 broad steps, slick with rain. As he climbed, he counted breaths instead of steps. In for 4. Out for 4. Aaron's voice had once teased him about counting everything when he was nervous. Ceiling tiles in hospital rooms, fence posts on highways, the little brass buttons on the sleeves of a borrowed suit. She had called it his private arithmetic. He wished she were wrong about him now. A woman in a green gown stepped into his path and asked whether her driver had arrived. Caleb answered without breaking stride. The world sharpened around him in the way it did when instinct took control. He saw droplets gathered along the edge of Lenora's coat. He saw the bodyguard by the hotel door glance toward a guest who had raised his voice near the valet desk. He saw the camel coat place his untouched glass on the ledge of the fountain. Both his hands were free now. The right hand disappeared beneath the open front of his coat for less than a second, then came out empty. Checking placement. Confirming access. Caleb was 15 feet from Lenora. The man was 23. Caleb had no time to find the correct words. Correct words belonged to safe rooms and training manuals. He reached Lenora just as a photographer stepped backward and opened a narrow lane between them. Caleb lifted the wool wrap as though preparing to settle it around her shoulders. "Mrs. Voss," he said, smiling politely for anyone watching. "Your driver has been moved to the east exit. I need you to come with me now." Lenora turned, surprised and annoyed. Her eyes were dark and steady, the eyes of a woman accustomed to deciding within seconds whether another human being deserved attention. "I didn't request my car." "No, ma'am." Caleb placed the wrap lightly over her forearms, creating a private space between their bodies without touching her. His voice dropped. "There's a man behind you in a camel coat. He has followed you across the terrace for 9 minutes. Your security is watching the driveway. Do not turn around." For one dangerous moment, Lenora did exactly what frightened people do. She began to look. Caleb shifted the wrap, blocking the movement as though adjusting it. "Please," he said, "don't help him know we've seen him." Her face did not change, but he watched awareness enter it like cold entering water. Her gaze dropped to the stitched hotel crest on his chest, and then to his name tag. Caleb Rourke. "Who are you?" "Night parking." "And you expect me to walk away with a parking attendant?" "I expect you to decide for yourself." He kept his smile in place. "I'm not touching you. You can call your people right now. But if you stop here, he closes the space. If we move toward the ballroom, there are cameras, locked doors, and your security chief. Take my arm so it looks like you asked me to escort you." Her expression hardened. "You are aware how insane this sounds." "Yes, ma'am." "You could be the danger." "Yes." His honesty startled her more than reassurance would have. "My name is on my coat. My face is on every camera in this hotel. My truck is in employee parking and I clocked in at 6. I am the easiest man here to find. He has no phone, a false foundation pin, and shoes dry above the toes because he came through the service arcade. He set down a full glass when you moved toward the fountain, and he keeps his right side away from people." Caleb saw her eyes sharpen. She was frightened now, but she was thinking. "Your protection agent near the doors is named Ruiz," Caleb continued. "I heard someone address him earlier. We walk to him. You say, 'Camel coat, fountainside, tracking.' Nothing else. He'll understand." Lenora glanced toward the ballroom without turning her head. "How far is the man?" 20 feet and closing. Are you certain?" Caleb felt Aaron's blood warm on his hands again, though 11 years separated the memory from the rain beneath his shoes. "No," he said. "I'm certain enough to risk my job. I'm asking you to risk 30 seconds. Lenora's hand rose slowly and settled on his forearm. To anyone watching, the gesture looked natural, almost familiar. Caleb felt the tremor in her fingers through his sleeve. "Walk," she said. They moved toward the ballroom at the pace of two people who had nowhere urgent to be. Caleb angled his body half a step behind hers, not as a shield, that would have revealed too much, but close enough to turn if the man lunged. Lenora kept her chin lifted. Her public smile returned, flawless, except for the muscles tightened along her jaw. "He's moving," Caleb murmured. "Don't speed up. You are remarkably calm for a parking attendant." "I'm not calm. You look calm. That is different." A cluster of donors blocked the direct path to the doors. Caleb guided Lenora around them toward a row of tall windows where light spilled across the wet stone. Their reflections moved together, the powerful woman in white, the working man in red, strangers joined by a lie neither had chosen. Behind them, a shoe scraped. Caleb heard it beneath the music, conversation, and rain. The camel coat had accelerated. Lenora's grip tightened. "How close?" 15 feet. "Ruiz is looking the other way. He'll look when you say his name." The security chief stood near the ballroom doors, listening to a nervous hospital administrator. Caleb waited until they were 8 feet away. "Mr. Ruiz," Lenora called, her tone warm enough for a social greeting. Ruiz turned. His eyes moved first to Lenora's face, then to her hand on Caleb's arm, then to the hotel jacket. Something in his posture changed. "Mrs. Voss?" She reached him and spoke without moving her lips. "Camel coat, fountainside, tracking." Ruiz did not ask who Caleb was or why Lenora had chosen him. He stepped between her and the terrace, raised one hand to his collar microphone and said, "North team, close west," quietly. Then he took Lenora by the elbow and directed both of them through the ballroom doors. The last thing Caleb saw before the glass closed was the man in the camel coat stopping beside the fountain, his expression no longer patient. Inside, warmth hit Caleb's face. A string quartet played near the stage while servers cleared coffee cups and dessert plates from linen tables. Hundreds of people continued talking beneath crystal chandeliers. Nothing in the room reflected what had almost entered it. Ruiz moved Lenora behind a velvet partition near the auction office and told another agent to lock the service corridor. Caleb remained by the doors. Doubt rushed back with such force he felt dizzy. Perhaps he had misread every detail. Perhaps the man was a nervous donor, a private investigator, or a guest with an awkward habit. Perhaps Caleb had frightened Lenora, interfered with security, and publicly attached himself to a woman who could destroy his livelihood with one phone call. The entire sequence had taken less than a minute. From inside his own body, it already felt impossible. Bryce Talley appeared from the coat check room, his face pinched with outrage. "What are you doing in here?" he whispered. "Why did you leave the valet stand?" Caleb opened his mouth, but before he could answer, movement outside caught his eye. Through the tall windows, two plainclothes agents approached the camel coat from different directions. The man turned toward the arcade. A third agent stepped from behind a column. The man changed direction again, abandoning the slow movements that had hidden him, One hand went beneath his coat. Ruiz's team reached him before it came out. The struggle lasted perhaps 4 seconds and looked, from the ballroom, like 3 men greeting one another too roughly. Then they guided him behind the fountain wall and out of sight. No one screamed. The quartet did not miss a note. A surgeon at the nearest table laughed so loudly he slapped the cloth with his palm. Bryce followed Caleb's gaze. "What is that?" Caleb could not answer. His knees had begun to shake. Lenora stood several feet away with Ruiz, watching the same empty section of terrace. She turned slowly toward Caleb. Her public expression was gone. What remained was not the face from magazine covers or televised hearings. It was the face of a woman who had just understood that the distance between an ordinary evening and catastrophe could be measured in footsteps. They took Caleb to a small conference room behind the ballroom. Bryce came with them until Ruiz closed the door in his face. The room smelled of coffee, printer toner, and the lilies arranged for the gala. Lenora sat at the end of a narrow table while Ruiz questioned Caleb in a calm, even voice. Where had he first noticed the man? Which entrance had the man used? Had Caleb seen a weapon? Did he recognize him from somewhere? Caleb answered everything he could and refused to decorate what he did not know. "I never saw a weapon," he said. "I saw him protect his right side. That could mean anything." Ruiz studied him. "But you believed it meant enough?" "Yes." "Why?" Caleb looked down at his hands. Despite washing them twice, the grease line beneath his thumbnail remained. "Guests notice details," Bryce had said. Ruiz noticed it too, but without contempt. "Because people who belong at a party let the party distract them," Caleb said. "He never did. He used the room, but he wasn't part of it. He watched her reflection in the windows when he wanted to look away. He kept stone behind him so nobody could approach from the rear. He changed position every time she did, but only after someone crossed his line of sight. And he held one side of his coat closed in the wind." Ruiz leaned back slightly. "Military? No. Law enforcement? No. Security?" Caleb hesitated. "A long time ago, I worked loss prevention at a retail center. 6 months. Training? Not the kind you mean." Ruiz's phone vibrated. He read the message, and the muscles around his mouth tightened. He stepped into the hall. Lenora remained seated across from Caleb. For a while, the two of them listened to the muffled music through the wall. Then she asked, "What kind of training did you mean?" Caleb had not spoken about the parking lot in years. His sister knew the shape of the story, but not every detail. Owen knew only that his mother had died when he was very small. Caleb had told him she loved old songs, strawberry pie, and thunderstorms. He had never told his son about the stranger by the cart return, or the half-second in which Caleb had chosen to be reasonable. That truth belonged to adulthood, and Caleb hoped Owen would be old before he needed it. Yet Lenora waited without pressing, her hands folded on the table, and he felt she had earned one honest sentence. "My wife was attacked in a parking lot," he said. "I saw the man watching her before he moved." Lenora's eyes lowered. "And you acted?" "Late." The word came out flatter than he expected. "I decided I needed to be sure. I was afraid of embarrassing a stranger, afraid of looking foolish. I spent 1 second finding a harmless explanation." He rubbed his thumb across the grease-darkened nail. It was a very expensive second. The quartet beyond the wall shifted into something slow and mournful. Lenora did not offer sympathy in the easy language people use when they are uncomfortable. She did not say everything happened for a reason or tell him not to blame himself. Caleb was grateful. After a moment, she asked, "Is that why you watch people?" "At first. And now? Now I don't know how not to." He looked toward the door. "Sometimes it's useful. Mostly it just makes grocery stores tiring." A faint, sad breath escaped her. almost a laugh. Mr. Rourke, 400 people were outside tonight. Trained agents were outside tonight. You were the only person who noticed him. I was probably the only person there who had once been punished for not noticing. Ruiz returned before she could answer. He closed the door and faced Lenora. They found a ceramic blade inside the lining of his coat and a folded access map to the West Service corridor. The foundation pin concealed a transmitter. Tulsa police are taking custody. His eyes moved to Caleb. Your assessment was correct. The confirmation did not bring relief immediately. It brought weight. Caleb sat down because his legs no longer seemed reliable. A ceramic blade. A map. A transmitter. Objects were worse than suspicions because objects could be held, photographed, entered into evidence. They turned the evening into something that had truly happened. Caleb placed both hands on the table and breathed until the room stopped tilting. Lenora rose, crossed to the sideboard, and poured water into a glass. She set it before him. The gesture was ordinary, yet Caleb felt its strangeness. Earlier that evening, people had placed empty glasses in his hands without looking at him. Now Lenora Voss, whose name appeared on buildings and scholarship funds, stood quietly while he drank. Was he connected to the threats from last fall? She asked Ruiz. We don't know yet. Did he enter through the service arcade? Yes. He used a vendor badge issued to a refrigeration contractor. Caleb closed his eyes. He had been right about the dry hair, the shoes, the false pin. Each correct detail made the past hurt more, not less. Aaron's parking lot rose again in full color, the cart rolling unattended, a bag of oranges splitting on the pavement, one orange turning in a slow circle beneath the taillights. He had spent years telling himself that no one could have known. Tonight proved that sometimes someone could know. Not with certainty, never with certainty, but enough to move. Ruiz asked whether Caleb needed medical attention. No. You're pale. I work 2 jobs. Pale is normal. Ruiz almost smiled. Lenora did not. She studied Caleb with an expression he could not name. It was not gratitude alone. It was shame, perhaps, though Caleb could not understand why she would feel shame. Mr. Ruiz, she said, I want every detail of how this man entered, where our coverage failed, and why an employee outside the security structure identified him first. Ruiz nodded. You'll have it. And I want Mr. Rourke protected from any employment consequences related to leaving his station. Caleb looked up. That won't be necessary. It is already necessary, she said. Your manager has attempted to enter this room twice. Bryce entered 5 minutes later with the hotel's general manager, a silver-haired woman named Delia Cates. Bryce had recovered enough confidence to look offended rather than frightened. We are, of course, grateful that the situation was resolved, he began, but there are protocols for staff, and Mr. Rourke abandoned. Lenora turned her head. She did not raise her voice. Mr. Rourke did not abandon his station. He recognized a threat that every person paid to recognize threats had missed, and he moved me to safety without causing panic. Choose your next sentence carefully. Bryce's mouth stayed open, but the words vanished. Caleb felt no satisfaction. Public humiliation, even deserved, always made him uncomfortable. He knew what it was to stand in work clothes while people with power discussed whether you were competent enough to keep feeding your child. Delia Cates stepped forward. Mrs. Voss, Mr. Rourke will face no discipline. He has our gratitude. He should have your attention, Lenora replied. Gratitude is what people offer when they want to feel generous without changing anything. The room went still. Caleb looked at her, surprised. She met his eyes briefly, and he understood that the sentence was not only for the hotel. Perhaps it was for herself. Delia asked Caleb whether he wished to go home. He thought of Marco alone at the curb and the line of vehicles still waiting under the rain. "My shift ends at 1, he said. Bryce stared at him. "You're going back outside? There are keys on the board." After all this? Caleb stood and zipped his red jacket. Cars don't know what happened. Lenora's expression softened. "Mr. Rourke, before you leave, I would like to speak with you privately." Caleb glanced at the clock. "I can give you 5 minutes." It was an absurd thing to say to someone who could buy the hotel, but she only nodded. When the others left, Lenora remained standing beside the conference table. Without Ruiz, aides, donors, or cameras, she seemed smaller than she had on the terrace, though no less commanding. "I owe you my life," she said. Caleb shook his head. "You don't know that. A man carried a blade and a map of the route to my private suite. That tells us what he prepared, not what he would have done. You are determined to minimize your part. I'm trying not to invent a bigger story than the facts." Lenora walked to the window where only the dark reflection of the room could be seen. "People have been trying to turn me into a story for 30 years. Ruthless founder, difficult employer, first woman to build a national freight network from nothing, cold widow, billionaire philanthropist. Depending on who is speaking, I am either proof of the American dream or evidence that it is corrupt." She looked back at him. "Tonight, I was a woman standing in the rain who did not know someone was preparing to hurt her." Caleb said nothing. "And you were a man I would not have noticed." The honesty might have offended someone else. It relieved him. Most people don't. "Does that anger you?" "Sometimes." He thought about it. "Not as much as it used to." "Why not?" "Because invisible people see things." Lenora absorbed that. Then she reached into her evening bag, removed a card, and placed it on the table. "Call this number tomorrow. My office will arrange whatever you need." Caleb did not touch the card. "I don't need anything. Everyone needs something. That doesn't make it yours to solve." Her brows drew together. "Your truck has 2 different front tires. One is nearly bald. Your jacket cuff is repaired with black thread. You work nights here and days somewhere else. I am not insulting you by observing facts." "No, ma'am." "Then let me help." For one dangerous second, Caleb pictured everything her help could erase. The stack of hospital bills from Owen's emergency room visit in January, the cracked kitchen tile he covered with a rug, the science museum payment, the transmission, the exhausting calculation behind every grocery cart. The temptation was not greed. It was rest. Rest for him, security for Owen, 1 month without choosing which bill could wait. Lenora saw something change in his face. "Name a number," she said gently. Caleb looked at the card, then at the grease beneath his thumbnail. "I can't." "Can't or won't?" "Both." "Pride?" "No." He searched for words that could cross the distance between their lives. "What I did outside has to stay outside money. Otherwise, every time I remember it, I'll wonder whether part of me saw an opportunity instead of a person." Lenora's expression sharpened. "You believe accepting help would corrupt the act?" "Maybe not for someone else. For me, yes. That seems unnecessarily severe. I have lived by severe rules for a long time. And have they made you happy?" Caleb almost smiled. "They kept my son fed." She looked toward the card. "You have a son?" "Owen. He's 8. Does he know what happened to his mother?" "Not all of it." Would refusing help serve him? The question struck exactly where she intended. Caleb felt his shoulders tighten. Don't use my boy to make your gratitude easier. Silence followed. Lenora's eyes flashed, not with anger alone, but recognition. She had crossed a line and knew it. You are right, she said. I apologize. Caleb had expected argument. The apology disarmed him. He exhaled slowly. I'm not trying to be noble, Mrs. Voss. I'm tired, and I could use every dollar you might offer. That's why I have to say no before I convince myself the money means something it doesn't. Then what would not offend your rules? Nothing for tonight. There must be something. Caleb thought of Owen asking whether the field trip payment could be late. He thought of the men on the terrace who had been trained to look and had still looked in the wrong direction. Pay me for work tomorrow, he said. Not for what I did tonight. Lenora studied him for a long moment. What kind of work? I don't know yet. That's your problem. For the first time she smiled, not the polished smile from the terrace, but something tired and genuine. You are very direct with people who could fire you. You don't employ me. I could buy the hotel. That seems like a lot of paperwork to avoid an argument. Her laugh came unexpectedly and vanished just as quickly, leaving the room warmer. All right, Mr. Rourke. No reward for tonight, but Ruiz will contact you about reviewing our event procedures. If you have useful observations, you will be paid market rates for your time. Future work. Future work. No press. Agreed. No photograph with a giant check. You have my word. And nobody tells my son I saved a billionaire. Lenora tilted her head. Why? Because I don't want him believing courage belongs to dramatic nights. I want him to think it's packing lunch when you're tired and telling the truth when it costs something. She looked at him with the same concentration she had used when deciding whether to trust him on the terrace. What does your son believe you do? He tells people I fix trucks and park fancy cars. That is accurate. It is enough. Lenora picked up the card and wrote another number on the back. This reaches me directly, not my office. Keep it. Caleb took it because refusing again would have become theater. As he reached the door, she said, Mr. Rourke. He turned. I did not trust you because of your jacket, your name tag, or your explanation. I trusted you because you admitted you could be wrong. Caleb stood with one hand on the knob. People who are certain are usually the ones I worry about. Lenora nodded. Thank you, Caleb. She used his first name without making it sound like charity. You're welcome, he said, and returned to the rain. Marco met him at the valet stand with 3 key fobs looped between his fingers. Where have you been? Tally's been walking around like his necktie is strangling him. Caleb took the keys. Problem inside. What kind? Handled. Marco looked toward the ballroom, then back at Caleb's face. You look terrible. I looked terrible at 6. Worse now. That's what overtime does. Marco knew him well enough to understand when not to push. He handed over a ticket for a blue Cadillac. Caleb jogged into the garage, where concrete amplified every footstep and the smell of wet tires mixed with oil and exhaust. His body performed familiar tasks while his mind lagged behind. Row D, space 14. Mirror check. Seat back. Parking brake. He drove the Cadillac beneath the hotel lights and opened the rear door for an elderly couple. The man tipped him $3 without making eye contact. Caleb thanked him. A woman in silver complained that her Jaguar had taken 12 minutes. A surgeon asked Caleb whether he had seen a missing umbrella, then interrupted the answer to take a phone call. The world had not changed. That steadied him. Near midnight, Bryce approached the stand. His face was pale, and the usual managerial sharpness had drained from his voice. "Caleb, Mr. Talley, Delia told me what happened." Caleb waited. Bryce looked toward Marco, who tactfully carried a stack of tickets to the far end of the counter. "I may have misjudged the situation earlier." Earlier meaning the grease on my hand or leaving the station. Bryce's mouth tightened. "Both." Caleb could have made him suffer. A few words would have been enough. He could have repeated Lenora's warning, mentioned the security report, or let Bryce imagine how close he had come to defending rules over a human life. Instead, Caleb said, "You were trying to run your shift." Bryce looked relieved too quickly. Caleb added, "But next time a worker says something feels wrong, listen before you remind him of his place." The relief vanished, replaced by shame. "I will." "Good." Caleb reached for another key. The conversation was over. At 1:15, after the last guest's Range Rover disappeared into the rain, Caleb clocked out and drove east across the city. The storm had softened to mist. Downtown towers faded behind him, their lights blurred across the windshield. His truck vibrated at 55 miles per hour, a reminder that the front tires needed balancing in addition to replacing. He passed the closed tire shop, the 24-hour pharmacy, and the church where Aaron's funeral had filled 3 pews with mechanics still wearing work boots. Halfway to his sister's apartment, his hands began to shake. The trembling always waited until danger had passed. During crisis, his body became a machine. Afterward, the machine returned everything it had borrowed. Caleb pulled into the empty lot of a laundromat and shut off the engine. Rain whispered against the roof. He sat with both hands on the steering wheel while the parking lot from 11 years ago unfolded around him. He saw Erin laughing because one of the grocery bags had torn. He heard her call, "Caleb, catch that orange," just before the stranger moved. He remembered the impossible brightness of the ambulance lights and Owen, not yet 2, crying in his car seat because everyone had forgotten to give him the crackers in the diaper bag. Caleb had once believed grief weakened over time. It did not. Grief changed jobs. In the beginning, it crushed his chest and refused to let him sleep. Later, it became vigilance, work, rules, and the habit of checking every door twice. It became sandwiches cut diagonally because Aaron had cut them that way. It became refusing to drink because Owen deserved one parent who always came home. It became watching a man's champagne glass beneath hotel lights. Caleb lowered his forehead to the steering wheel. "I saw him this time," he whispered, though he did not know whether he was speaking to Aaron, himself, or God. There was no answer. There had never been one, but for the first time in years, the sentence did not feel like an apology. His sister Tessa had left the porch light on. Caleb entered quietly and found her asleep on the couch beneath a crocheted blanket, a detective show murmuring on the television. Owen slept in the small spare room with one leg outside the blanket and his hair pressed flat on one side. A plastic model rocket stood unfinished on the dresser. The permission slip for the Science Museum lay beside it, folded into a square. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed and watched his son breathe. Every parent watched a sleeping child with some measure of wonder, but Caleb watched with an attention almost painful in its intensity. The rise of the narrow shoulders, the soft whistle of air through Owen's nose, the pause, then another breath. Safety was not a permanent condition. It was a collection of ordinary moments, each one passing unnoticed until it ended. Caleb pulled the blanket over Owen's bare foot. The boy stirred. "Dad?" "Go back to sleep." "You done with work?" "Yeah." "Was it busy?" Caleb looked at the folded permission slip. "Pretty quiet." Owen opened one eye. "Did famous people come?" "A few." Did you park a Lamborghini? 2. Cool. The eye closed again. Love you. Caleb rested his palm lightly on the boy's hair. Love you too. On Tessa's refrigerator, beneath a magnet shaped like a peach, hung a drawing Owen had made at school. 2 figures stood beside a truck with the hood open. The taller figure wore a red jacket. Above them, in Owen's uneven handwriting, were the words, "My dad can fix things." Caleb stood before the drawing for a long time. Children told the truth without knowing how large it was. He could not fix the parking lot. He could not repair Erin's absence or return the years Owen had grown without her. But tonight, perhaps, he had kept something else from breaking. Maybe that was all fixing ever meant, noticing the failure early enough and putting your hands where they could still matter. Ruiz called 2 days later. He did not mention the attacker's name or motives, only that the investigation was active and Caleb's observations had been materially useful. Then he asked whether Caleb could meet at Voss Meridian headquarters the following Tuesday. For what? Caleb asked. Mrs. Voss wants you to review video from 3 public events. I'm a mechanic. She knows. I park cars. She knows that too. Does she know I don't own a suit? Ruiz paused. She said you would bring that up. Caleb attended the meeting in clean work pants and the only button-down shirt he owned. Voss Meridian occupied a restored train depot near the river, all brick arches, glass walls, and quiet employees carrying tablets. Caleb felt every scuff on his boots. The receptionist offered coffee without looking impatient when he asked whether it was free. Ruiz met him upstairs and showed him security footage from product launches, charity dinners, and shareholder meetings. Caleb watched hours of ordinary human behavior. He noted the catering employee who entered through a restricted door after learning the rhythm of an automatic lock. He noticed a protester changing jackets in a restroom corridor. He noticed a man photographing ceiling cameras while pretending to take pictures of an architectural mural. Some of his concerns led nowhere. One person was an electrician. Another was the anxious father of an employee receiving an award. Ruiz never mocked the wrong calls. We investigate patterns, he said, not pride. At the end of the day, Lenora entered the room carrying 2 paper cups. She placed one before Caleb. Ruiz says you are irritatingly observant. He said irritatingly. His face did. Ruiz left without defending himself. Lenora sat across from Caleb. I would like you to do this twice a month. Event reviews, site walks, training exercises. Caleb looked at the contract she slid toward him. The hourly rate was more than he earned during an entire shift at the hotel. This is too much. It is what we pay specialized consultants. I am not specialized. You have spent 11 years specializing. The words landed gently, but they landed. Caleb read the contract again. No payment connected to that night? None. This is for work performed after that night. I keep my job at Danner's. Of course. And I choose the hours around my son. Yes. No interviews. Caleb, I remember our agreement. He signed. The new work did not transform his life overnight. Real change rarely arrived with music or applause. It came in practical increments. Caleb replaced the front tires on his truck. He paid the science museum fee before Friday, and Owen came home talking about dinosaur bones, tornado machines, and a room where children could build bridges from wooden blocks. Caleb reduced his shifts at the hotel from 3 nights to 1. He slept more. His patience returned in places where exhaustion had worn it thin. He no longer snapped when Owen left wet towels on the bathroom floor. He attended a parent conference without checking the time every 2 minutes. At Voss Meridian, Ruiz taught him the formal language for instincts Caleb had carried without names. Baseline behavior, target fixation, access probing. environmental shielding. Caleb taught Ruiz's younger agents what invisibility looked like from below. Stop watching only the people who expect to be watched, he told them. Look at who workers avoid. Look at who never asks a question because they studied the answer beforehand. Look at the hands when everyone else is looking at faces. He also taught them humility. During one exercise, a quiet woman carrying bakery boxes entered 3 restricted floors because every guard assumed someone else had checked her. She was a 63-year-old payroll clerk named Nadine, whom Caleb had recruited for the test. When the embarrassed agents asked how Caleb knew she would pass unnoticed, he said, "Because none of you asked her name when she brought breakfast." Lenora sometimes observed from the back of the room. She did not praise him publicly. She did something more respectful. She listened, took notes, and changed procedures. Service workers received direct reporting channels. Contract employees were included in safety briefings. Hotel cleaners, drivers, caterers, and maintenance staff were taught that concern would be evaluated rather than punished. Gratitude is what people offer when they want to feel generous without changing anything, Lenora had said. She changed things. 6 months after the gala, Caleb returned to the Halcyon for his Saturday shift. The weather had turned warm, and wedding guests crowded the entrance beneath strings of white lights. Bryce Talley now greeted every employee by name, sometimes with an effort so visible it became awkward. Caleb respected the effort anyway. Near 10 o'clock, a black sedan pulled to the curb. Lenora stepped out alone except for Ruiz, who emerged from the passenger side. She wore a navy dress and carried no entourage. Caleb opened her door. "Good evening, Mrs. Voss." "Mr. Rourke." Her eyes moved to the red jacket. "You still work here?" "Saturday nights." "Why?" He looked at the line of cars. "I said future work, not rescue." She accepted the answer. Ruiz handed Caleb an envelope. Inside were 2 tickets to a baseball game and a note written in Lenora's precise hand. For Owen. "Payment for the 3 hours you spent correcting my security team's terrible training manual." Caleb looked up. 3 hours? Lenora's mouth curved. "You insisted on accurate billing. These seats are behind home plate. Market rate. That is not how markets work. It is how mine works." He considered refusing, then noticed Ruiz pretending not to watch. "I'll accept on behalf of the consultant who corrected the manual." "Wise." Lenora began toward the hotel doors, then stopped. "Caleb, there is something else. The children's wing opens next month. The hospital asked me to speak." "Congratulations. I intend to speak about attention, about how institutions fail when they assume wisdom belongs only to titles." Caleb felt warning rise in him. "No names." "No names," she promised. "But the lesson matters." He nodded. The lesson matters. She looked toward the crowded entrance where servers, drivers, nurses, executives, and guests crossed through the same pool of light. "I used to believe leadership meant being the most important person in the room. And now? Now I think it may mean noticing who the room has decided is unimportant." Caleb glanced at the key rack. "That sounds harder." "It is." She entered the hotel beside Ruiz. Later, after the wedding party had gone and the final set of headlights vanished down the avenue, Caleb drove home with the baseball tickets tucked inside the glove compartment. Owen was awake at the kitchen table assembling the model rocket while Tessa drank tea across from him. "Dad!" Owen held up a crooked cardboard fin. "We're going to launch it Sunday. Aunt Tessa says the wind might be good." Caleb set the tickets on the table. Owen read them twice before understanding. "No way." "Way? Behind home plate? Apparently. How did you get these?" Caleb took off his red jacket and hung it over a chair. For a moment, he thought about telling the whole story. Owen was older now. Not old enough for the parking lot, but old enough to understand that his father sometimes did work beyond fixing engines and parking cars. Yet Caleb looked at the boy's open face and chose the truth in a size he could carry. "A woman I work for thought I did a good job." Owen grinned. "Fixing something?" Caleb looked toward the window. Across the dark glass, he saw the reflection of his small family, Tessa with her tea, Owen holding the rocket fin, himself standing behind them with tired eyes and permanent grease in the lines of his hands. "Yeah," he said, "something like that." Owen returned to the rocket, explaining the launch angle with great seriousness. Caleb listened. Outside, a car slowed near the curb, and his attention flicked toward it automatically. A neighbor waved through the windshield and drove on. The old alarm inside him settled. Perhaps it would never disappear. Perhaps some wounds did not heal because they had become part of how a person protected what remained. Caleb no longer believed he could balance the universe by seeing every danger before it arrived. That was grief pretending to be a bargain. He could not save everyone. He could not repay the second that had taken Aaron. But he could keep his eyes open without letting fear become his master. He could act when action was required, admit uncertainty when it was not, and teach his son that courage did not have to be loud. Owen pressed the cardboard fin into place and asked, "Does that look straight?" Caleb leaned closer, studied the angle, and gently adjusted it. "Almost," he said. "You just have to notice where it starts going wrong." Then he held the pieces steady while his son fixed them together. Caleb Rourke reminds us that true heroism rarely arrives with applause. It shows up in tired eyes that still scan a crowd, in grease-stained hands that hold open doors, in the choice to act when a silent voice whispers that something isn't right. Caleb could have dismissed the stranger's still champagne glass as nothing, but instead he trusted his hard-earned instincts and placed the safety of another above his own security. That decision didn't just save a billionaire's life. It restored a broken promise he once made to himself on a night of unbearable loss. The lesson is crystal clear. Our ordinary moments are the battleground where character is forged. Paying attention, speaking up, and doing the hard, hidden work of protecting others can keep a heart from breaking, or help one heal. Courage isn't loud, it's consistent. Kindness isn't flashy, it's deliberate. And redemption is built one mindful choice at a time. If Caleb's story touched you, tell us which moment resonated most in the comments below, and let's start a conversation about the quiet ways we can all stand guard for one another. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you'll never miss the next story that lifts your spirit and sparks your courage.